I'm W. Curtis Preston from DRUVA, and I'm talking about data protection for the cloud era. So there are a number of things that when we talk to customers, that we run into, and that is the first is this mandate to go to the cloud, and I think that's a lot of people tell me that they've definitely been told that they have to move some or all of their infrastructure to the cloud. The other thing is that they're being asked to consolidate the data centers, and another thing that's happened is as companies are, due to the proliferation of very good internet, companies are becoming more and more distributed. So they're beginning to have more and more remote offices or branch offices, and those remote offices need data protection and disaster recovery. And this next one, this idea of being able to protect against ransomware, my personal opinion is that's something that is, to me right now, it's the most important thing, because it seems that a week doesn't go by that there isn't another company that isn't attacked by ransomware, and unfortunately, most of them, what they're doing is they're paying the ransom, which for me is the absolute worst possible thing that you can do. And I think the city of Baltimore is a perfect example of why. So Baltimore was attacked by ransomware. They decided to pay the ransom because they didn't have a good DR system. The result was that they got attacked a second time, because the only thing that you've proved by paying the ransom is that you will prove that you will pay the ransom, and so you'll get attacked multiple times. The other problem that people are having, this idea of complex storage and backup system refresh. I spent an entire career, so I've been in backup and recovery for 26 years, and one thing I can definitely explain is how complex it is to upgrade a backup system. And I will also say is there's nothing more terrifying than upgrading your backup system, because your backup system is, your backup system, and you don't want to mess it up. And so there's nothing more terrifying than upgrading that. And then the other thing is this idea of protecting new workloads. So the data center is no longer the center of data. So we're now using IaaS, Platform as a Service, SaaS services such as Office 365, Salesforce, G Suite. Our data is now all over the place, and as a result, we need to protect those new workloads, and this is another thing that we run into. So one of the other things is that people are starting to recognize that this, when you talk about big data and analytics and things like that, this secondary data, the versions of the data over time, is also another resource that can be tapped. But in order to tap that resource, you need to put all of that data into a place where you can tap that resource, and that's currently simply not the case. And so when we talk about all of these different things, so on the left here you can see the data centers, endpoints, and the cloud. These are the three different places that we see data arising. So the data center is the same old, right? We've had data centers forever. And the second is the endpoints. And now, every single person in this audience, I am absolutely sure, has both a laptop and a smartphone. And both of those are capable of creating company data that is now all over the place, and that data needs to be protected as much as the data in the data center, and some, depending on the company, even more so. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, the idea of these cloud workloads. So whether you're using Amazon or Azure or GCP, or using a SaaS service like Office 365, that's still your corporate data that needs to be protected as well. And then we have all of this architecture, these different systems to meet the different needs that you have. So you've got a backup system, you got a DR system, you got an archive system, you got a compliance system, you got an analytics system, an e-discovery system, all of these different systems. So you can put all the different sources of data with all of the different ways that we deal with that data. You end up with cost and risk. Things like we talk about dark silos and dark data, and a really important one here, the second one here, this redundancy and duplication. The idea is that you're paying for all of these different copies that you have of data, and you end up with a lot of penalties, and you end up with risk. The more places you're putting the data, the more risk that hardware is, or risk that data is at. And some of those risks, I think, are existential. I talked about ransomware earlier. Every single week, a new ransomware attack seems to happen, and the fines are getting fine is the variant, not the ransoms are getting larger and larger. And in addition to those kinds of costs and risks, there's also things like GDPR. And when we talk about GDPR, and now the new Consumer Protection Act for California, these things have teeth and they have fines. And in the case of GDPR, for example, up to 4% of the annual revenue of the company. Now, if you're not familiar with GDPR and you're saying, well, that has to do with the EU, why do I care? Well, the question is, do you have any customers or marketing contacts in the EU? And if you do, then you're subject to the GDPR and those fines. So it's something that you need to worry about. So we are a cloud-based company, a SaaS-based company, just like Salesforce, like Office 365. So the question is, why did we do that? And we think that the cloud offers a unique opportunity. And the first thing I will say is that we felt when we started this several years ago that the cloud is where people were going. We were skating where the puck was going. Now the puck is there, and we're there, right? The other thing is that while the amount of data that's going to be stored in the cloud is going to go up and up and up, the costs of storing that data in the cloud is going to continue to go down. But if you look at the yellow here, what you see is the costs of the cloud are going to go down at a lower rate. They already are at a faster rate, than the costs of storing that same data on-prem. So if you're not familiar with DRUVA, for those of you unfamiliar, DRUVA means the North Star. And we are the largest cloud-based service-based data protection vendor. We have over 4,000 customers, and we are built natively on and run entirely in AWS. And we have over 150 petabytes under management. And one thing that tends to surprise people, I mentioned that we're one of the top 3 users of S3. So you're familiar with AWS, we are in the top 3 users of their S3 service. So we protect the endpoints, data centers, and cloud workloads. And when I say cloud workloads, I mean things running in AWS as well as SaaS services like Salesforce, Office 365, and G Suite. We protect all of that to the DRUVA Cloud platform. We always start with backup and recovery. That's the first service that we offer. And then on top of that, we leverage other services. Depending on which service we're talking about, for example, for data centers, we layer DR on top of that. We also do that for AWS or workloads. We leverage or add disaster recovery services on top of that. We also do governance services, right? So making sure that you comply with certain regulations. For example, this morning I was working with somebody on setting together a regular expression to identify sensitive data. And we can actually say this is sensitive data, and it's not, that we can notify you that sensitive data is now being stored on a laptop where it's not supposed to be stored. We can stop that data from being backed up, notify that, for example, there's a spreadsheet with Social Security numbers in it, right? And that you or your company has a policy that no one's allowed to store Social Security numbers on their laptops. We can tell you that that policy is being violated and stop it from proliferating. We also work with e-discovery services. So we're a SaaS service, so we integrate with other SaaS services to do e-discovery. And then finally, we're starting to layer data intelligence services on top of that. For example, the first service that we did is that we're now watching data as it's coming in, and we're looking for evidence of ransomware. So using machine learning techniques, what we're doing is we're looking for unusual data patterns. So, Fred, on his best day updates 3 spreadsheets, right? And then suddenly it's Thursday and Fred updates 1,500 spreadsheets. Gee, Fred was either really productive or Fred just got ransomware. That's an example of the kind of thing that we would notice. And then the admin gets notified, backups are stopped for that laptop, and then the admin can decide what to do. The best practice is wipe the laptop, reinstall the OS, restore the data, and then actually will allow the admin admin to delete those infected backups out of our system as well, at their option. So when you look at all of the different things that companies do, from applications to infrastructure, there has been over the last several years, there's been a change towards SaaS type services. I think Salesforce is a perfect example of that. So they probably the first big SaaS vendor, 1-800-NO-SOFTWARE was their phone number, but that proliferation has continued. You know, those of you that live here in the Bay Area recognize a lot of these names. These are all buildings are running around. And then finally, so for example, even when we look at databases and infrastructure, even databases and infrastructure are now SaaS services. So I think the perfect example of that is you start with VMware Cloud on AWS. So if you like VMware, you can run VMware as a service on AWS, which is a service. And then AWS offers RDS, which is the relational database service. So you can run a database service on top of a platform, which is VMware as a service, on top of AWS, which is a service. This is the new way of things, and that's the way DRUVA is. We are a service-based product. The advantages of that approach is that it's the first and really important advantage is that it's less expensive, right? The other is that we're leveraging AWS security. We've got the world's best security. It takes 15 minutes to deploy it. Think about any other backup system that you've had anything to do with. It definitely takes more than 15 minutes to deploy it, starting with shipping some hardware to you, installing some hardware, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We don't have to do any of that. The only thing you have to do is install an agent on the thing that you want to back up. In the case of VMware, it's an OVA, et cetera, and start porting it to your account, and backups just automatically happen. We do have guaranteed SLAs. We have scalability and global reach, meaning we can back up your data no matter where it resides in the world, and that includes honoring things like data sovereignty. So if you're, for example, Amazon's newest region is in the UAE, and so we now support that region as well. So looking underneath the hood here, the system is completely autonomous, and we support global deduplication. Let me speak to that for a moment. Every other dedu product of which I'm aware, and I've spent time with many of said products, they all have a cap. So it depends on the product. Whether, some backup software products, the cap is about 100 terabytes. Other more hardware dedupe appliances, that cap might be a petabyte. When you get to that number, you have to buy another one, right? So if you fill up a box or if you fill up an appliance, you end up buying another one, and you create what we call dedupe silos, which creates duplicate data, which creates increased costs. We are the only product, the only service where we globally deduplicate across your entire environment without any limitations. Meaning, when I say any limitations, I can tell you that we have multiple multi-petabyte, double-digit petabyte customers that are duplicating data across our entire environment without any performance implications. And the reason why you care is that we bill you based on the number of gigabytes that you're storing in S3. So that global dedupe reduces your footprint, which both makes your backup faster and also reduces your bill. Let's see here. I'm going to skip a couple of points there. So when I talk about how easy it is to deploy and how easy it is to scale, I think there's no better example than the one on the left here with Pfizer. So Pfizer was a customer that was backing up about 10,000 laptops. And then one day they came to us and they said, hey, we'd like to back up all our laptops. We've been watching too much about ransomware and we want to back up all our laptops. And our sales rep said, sounds great. How many laptops do you have? And they said, well, about 100,000, right? Roughly 10x of what we're currently doing. And we said, okay. And that was the end of the conversation. The only thing the customer had to do to prepare for scale of that magnitude was to install, and push out the client to 90,000 laptops. Once they did that, our back end automatically scaled to meet the needs of that customer. Live Nation is another customer of ours. I'm willing to bet, does anybody in the company know who Live Nation, or in the audience know who Live Nation is? It's Ticketmaster. No one knows them as Live Nation. Everybody knows them as Ticketmaster. They are more than just Ticketmaster, but that's that company. And we do all their backup DR and workload mobility. So we don't, some people might ask, what industries do you work with? And the answer is all, right? So there are some workloads that don't work well with internet-based backup, but for the most part, we work in a variety of multiples, a multiple of technologies. So in summary, the way we do backups, which again is SaaS-based data protection, and we do that for laptops, data centers, and cloud-based workloads, and SaaS-based workloads, the number one thing to understand is that it should cost less than whatever you're doing now, because you don't have to buy servers, buy backup software, manage backup software. You simply get a DRUVA account and start backing up your data to us. The back end is 100% managed by us. The other thing is that it removes data silos, so all of your data ends up in a single location. And the reason why that matters is as we add additional services where we're drawing additional value out of that data, all of your data is in a single location to run those analytic services against. And that includes things as important as things like e-discovery services. So today we can do e-discovery across all of your data without you having to manage an e-discovery a system. So we partner with e-discovery services, and what you do is you go in and you do an initial calling. You use our system to say, all right, I want all the emails with this pattern. I want all the emails from this person to this person, or all the emails from this group of people to an external group of people. And that's called calling. You call the data down to a manageable size, and then we create a WebDAV link that goes directly to the e-discovery vendor that then does all the fancy e-discovery stuff. No hardware to install, no software to manage, and 90% operational cut in operational costs. And again, on-demand, scale without limits, and I gave you a few examples of that. I will say, there is one limit, right? And that is our approach. The one downside is we can only go up to so big in a single data center. It's just the laws of physics, but that number is a lot bigger than you might think. We have many customers that are multi-petabyte customers and that have close to a petabyte within a single data center, and we back them up no problem. And if you're curious how we do that and how we basically get around the laws of physics, our booth is right over there, and I'll be happy to talk to you as much as you'd like. All right? And with that, I say thank you.